On September 15, 2021, 26-year-old Jake Morrison set out on what should have been a routine solo backpacking trip through the Olympic National Forest in Washington state. An experienced hiker from Portland, Oregon, Jake had been exploring the Pacific Northwest wilderness for over 8 years, documenting his adventures on his popular YouTube channel, Trail Tales with Jake. What began as a 5-day journey to film content for his 1,000 subscribers would become the most terrifying experience of his life and provide some of the most compelling evidence for Bigfoot's existence ever captured on camera. Jake Morrison wasn't your typical weekend warrior. As a freelance outdoor photographer and content creator, he spent nearly half the year in the wilderness, often alone for weeks at a time. His apartment in Portland was more like a gear storage facility, packed with cameras, camping equipment, and maps of remote trails throughout Oregon and Washington. Friends often joked that Jake was more comfortable sleeping under the stars than in his own bed, and they weren't wrong. The Olympic Peninsula had always held a special fascination for Jake. Its vast expanses of old-growth forest, rugged coastline, and minimal human presence made it perfect for the kind of immersive wilderness content his audience craved. He had hiked sections of the peninsula before, but never attempted the remote Quinault River Trail system that would be his destination for this September trip. Jake's plan was ambitious, but well within his capabilities. He intended to hike 37 miles over 5 days, following the Quinault River deep into the heart of the Olympic wilderness. The trail would take him through some of the most pristine temperate rainforest in North America, past ancient cedar groves and hidden waterfalls that few people ever see. His goal was to document the changing seasons and capture the ethereal beauty of the Pacific Northwest autumn. What Jake didn't know was that the Quinault River Valley had a long history of unexplained encounters. Local Native American tribes, particularly the Quinault Nation, had stories going back generations about the Siatko, large, hairy beings that lived deep in the forest and occasionally revealed themselves to humans. More recently, the area had generated dozens of Bigfoot sighting reports, though most were dismissed by authorities as misidentifications or hoaxes. Jake arrived at the Graves Creek trailhead at 7:30 a.m. on September 15, 2021. The parking area was empty except for one other vehicle, unusual for a Wednesday morning, but not uncommon for such a remote location. He spent 20 minutes organizing his gear and checking his camera equipment, including the GoPro Hero 9 mounted on his chest harness and a handheld Sony A7R4 for still photography. His pack weighed 42 pounds, loaded with 5 days of food, camping gear, and enough camera equipment to document every aspect of his journey. Jake had learned from years of solo hiking that preparation was everything. He carried emergency communication devices, water purification tablets, and enough backup batteries to keep his cameras running for a week. The first day of hiking was exactly what Jake had hoped for. The Quinault River Trail wound through cathedral-like groves of Douglas fir and western red cedar, some over 800 years old. His chest-mounted GoPro captured the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy while he provided commentary for his future video. Jake's voice was clear on the recording as he paused beside a massive cedar, explaining how you could hike for hours without seeing another person, experiencing just yourself and the forest the way it had been for thousands of years. By 4:15 p.m., Jake had covered 8 miles and reached his planned campsite beside Pony Creek. The location was perfect, a small clearing with access to fresh water and enough flat ground for his ultralight tent. As was his routine, Jake spent the first hour setting up camp and organizing his gear before beginning his evening photography session. It was during this golden hour shoot that Jake first noticed something unusual. While reviewing photos on his camera's LCD screen, he spotted what appeared to be a large, dark shape in the background of several images. The shape was partially obscured by trees and could have been a stump or shadow, but something about it bothered him. Jake muttered to himself about how weird it was, zooming in on the image. The shape seemed too tall and narrow to be a stump, and it appeared in 3 consecutive photos taken from slightly different angles. More puzzling, Jake couldn't remember seeing anything that large when he was composing the shots. As darkness fell, Jake prepared dinner on his lightweight camp stove while his cameras continued recording. He had developed a habit of keeping at least one camera running throughout his trips, partly for content, but mostly for safety. If something happened to him, the footage might help rescuers understand what went wrong. At 9:23 p.m., while Jake was cleaning his cooking gear, his GoPro captured a sound that would haunt him for months afterward. A low, resonant call echoed through the forest, not quite human, but far more complex than any animal vocalization he had heard in 8 years of wilderness camping. The sound lasted about 6 seconds and seemed to come from the direction where he had noticed the strange shape in his photographs. Jake's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of fear, his first instinct was curiosity, the same trait that had driven him to spend his life exploring remote places. He grabbed his headlamp and Sony camera, switching to video mode as he moved toward the edge of his campsite. He whispered to his camera that he had never heard anything like that before, describing how it sounded almost intelligent. For the next 20 minutes, Jake waited at the edge of his campsite, camera ready, listening for any repeat of the strange call. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no small animals moving through the underbrush, nothing. Even the constant sound of Pony Creek seemed muted, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. Jake eventually returned to his tent, but sleep came fitfully. His cameras continued recording throughout the night, capturing several more instances of the mysterious calls. Audio analysis would later reveal that the vocalizations came from multiple directions, suggesting either several creatures or one that was moving around Jake's campsite in a wide circle. Morning brought relief and renewed curiosity. Jake's first task was to review the night's footage, and what he found made his hands shake as he held the camera. At 2:47 a.m., his tent-mounted GoPro had captured a clear image of something moving past his campsite. The figure was upright, easily 7 feet tall, and covered in dark hair. Most remarkably, it moved with deliberate stealth, carefully placing each step to avoid making noise. Jake could barely breathe as he replayed the footage multiple times, realizing that this was actually happening. The creature had passed within 30 feet of Jake's tent, close enough that the camera's night vision mode captured remarkable detail. The figure's proportions were clearly humanoid, but massively built, with arms that hung nearly to its knees and a distinctive sagittal crest visible on top of its head. Most unsettling was the intelligence evident in its movement. This was not a mindless animal, but something that understood it was being watched. Jake's second day of hiking began with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Part of him wanted to pack up and hike out immediately, but his photographer's instincts and natural curiosity won out. He had potentially captured footage of one of the world's most elusive creatures. He couldn't just walk away. The trail on day 2 led deeper into the wilderness, following the Quinaulta River through increasingly dense forest. Jake's pace was slower than usual as he constantly scanned the trees around him, camera ready for any sign of his mysterious visitor. His commentary became more subdued, reflecting his growing awareness that he was no longer alone in the forest. At 11:30 a.m., while crossing a small tributary creek, Jake made a discovery that confirmed his suspicions. Pressed into the muddy bank were footprints unlike anything he had seen in his years of wilderness travel. The prints measured roughly 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, with clearly defined toe impressions that showed this was no bear or known animal. Jake whispered to his camera as he knelt beside the clearest print, noting that they had been made sometime the night before or early that morning. He observed the depth and estimated that whatever made these tracks had to weigh at least 400 pounds. Jake spent 20 minutes documenting the prints from every angle, using his hiking pole for scale and taking detailed measurements. The tracks showed a clear pattern of bipedal movement, with a stride length that suggested something much larger than a human, but walking upright like one. More disturbing was the direction of the tracks. They paralleled the trail Jake was following, staying about 50 yards back in the dense forest. Whatever had made these prints was following him, staying close enough to observe, but far enough away to remain hidden. The realization that he was being stalked sent a chill down Jake's spine. His 8 years of solo hiking had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was now screaming that he was in potential danger. But he was already 12 miles from the nearest road, with no choice but to continue forward or attempt a dangerous solo retreat through unfamiliar terrain. Jake's afternoon became a psychological battle between fear and fascination. His cameras captured his growing paranoia as he constantly looked over his shoulder, jumped at every sound, and second-guessed every decision. Yet he continued hiking deeper into the wilderness, driven by a combination of stubbornness and the knowledge that he might be documenting something extraordinary. At 3:45 p.m., Jake's stalker made its presence known in a way that left no doubt about its intelligence. While taking a break beside a fallen log, Jake heard the same resonant call from the previous night, but this time it came from directly ahead of him on the trail. When he looked up, a massive figure stood in the path about 100 yards away, partially obscured by the forest shadows, but clearly visible. The creature was even larger than Jake had estimated from the night footage. Standing upright, it appeared to be at least 8 feet tall, with a build that suggested immense strength. Its entire body was covered in dark, coarse hair, and its face, while difficult to see clearly, showed unmistakably intelligent eyes that seemed to be studying Jake as intently as he was studying it. Jake whispered with a shaking voice as he slowly raised his camera, acknowledging that it was real and actually happening. The standoff lasted approximately 30 seconds, long enough for Jake to capture several minutes of video footage that would later be analyzed by experts around the world. The creature showed no signs of aggression, but its posture conveyed a clear message. It was aware of Jake's presence and was choosing to reveal itself. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the forest with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Jake was left alone on the trail, his heart pounding and his hands shaking as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The encounter changed everything about Jake's trip. What had begun as a routine backpacking adventure had become something far more significant and dangerous. He now knew with certainty that he was sharing the forest with an unknown creature of remarkable intelligence and size. Jake's decision to continue hiking rather than retreat would prove to be both brave and foolish. Over the next 3 days, his mysterious companion would reveal itself repeatedly, always maintaining a careful distance but making its presence unmistakably known. The psychological pressure of being constantly watched by something so powerful began to take its toll. Day 3 brought more direct encounters. Jake's morning routine was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps circling his campsite, just beyond the range of his camera's night vision. When he emerged from his tent at dawn, he found that his food bag hung 12 feet high in a tree, according to proper bear safety protocols, had been carefully lowered and placed beside his tent. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. His stalker could have taken anything it wanted. Jake told his camera that this was getting really weird, his voice tight with stress. He described how it seemed like the creature was trying to communicate or something, but he didn't know what it wanted. The trail on day 3 led through some of the most remote wilderness in the Olympic Peninsula. Jake saw no other hikers, no aircraft overhead, no signs of human presence except the faint path beneath his feet. His isolation was complete, shared only with a creature that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of known science. At midday, while filming a segment about old-growth forest ecology, Jake captured footage that would become some of the most analyzed Bigfoot evidence ever recorded. His handheld camera was focused on a massive cedar when something moved in the background, a dark figure that stepped briefly into view before disappearing behind another tree. The figure was clearly the same creature Jake had been encountering, but this footage showed it in daylight with remarkable clarity. Its human-like posture was unmistakable, as was the intelligence evident in how it used the forest cover to remain mostly hidden while still allowing itself to be seen. Jake realized while reviewing the footage on his camera screen that the creature knew he was filming and was choosing when to show itself. This revelation was both thrilling and terrifying. Jake was documenting behavior that suggested a level of intelligence far beyond what mainstream science attributed to any unknown primate. His stalker wasn't just avoiding humans, it was actively managing its interactions with them. The psychological pressure intensified on day 4. Jake's sleep was constantly interrupted by sounds around his campsite, footsteps, breathing, and occasional vocalizations that seemed designed to let him know he was being watched. His cameras captured glimpses of movement throughout each night, but never enough to provide the definitive proof that would convince skeptics. Jake's commentary became increasingly strained as exhaustion and stress took their toll. He admitted to his camera on the morning of day 4 that he didn't know how much more of this he could take, feeling like he was losing his mind out there. But Jake's ordeal was far from over. Day 4 would bring the most intense encounter yet, one that would test his courage and provide footage that cryptozoologists would study for years to come. The trail on day 4 climbed steadily toward Enchanted Valley, a remote alpine meadow surrounded by towering peaks. As Jake gained elevation, the forest began to thin, providing less cover for his mysterious companion. He hoped this might mean an end to the constant surveillance, but he was wrong. At 2:30 p.m., while crossing an open meadow, Jake heard the now familiar call echoing off the surrounding mountains. But this time, the sound came from multiple directions, at least 3 different sources positioned around the meadow's perimeter. Jake realized with growing alarm that he wasn't being followed by one creature, but by several. He whispered to his camera that there was more than one, slowly turning to scan the tree line and realizing they had him surrounded. The meadow crossing became the longest 10 minutes of Jake's life. He could feel eyes watching him from the forest edge, and his cameras captured several glimpses of large, dark shapes moving between the trees. The creatures were coordinating their movements, staying hidden while maintaining visual contact with their human visitor. Jake reached the far side of the meadow without incident, but the message was clear. He was completely at the mercy of beings that could have overwhelmed him at any time. Their restraint suggested either benevolent intentions or a level of strategic thinking that was deeply unsettling. The final night of Jake's trip brought the most dramatic encounter yet. Camped beside a small alpine lake, Jake was awakened at 3:15 a.m. by the sound of something large moving through his campsite. His tent-mounted camera captured a figure approaching to within 10 feet of where he lay, close enough that he could hear its breathing through the thin nylon walls. The creature stayed beside Jake's tent for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally making soft vocalizations that sounded almost conversational. Jake lay perfectly still, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the creature could hear it. The footage from that night would later reveal remarkable details about the being's physical characteristics and behavior. When Jake finally worked up the courage to peer through his tent's mesh window, he found himself looking directly into a face that would haunt his dreams for months afterward. The creature's eyes reflected his headlamp's light, showing an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and curious. For several seconds, human and unknown beings studied each other through the thin barrier of the tent wall. Then, as if satisfied with what it had learned, the creature withdrew into the darkness, leaving Jake alone with the knowledge that he had just experienced something that would change his life forever. Jake's final day of hiking was a blur of exhaustion and relief. The creatures that had followed him for 4 days seemed to have withdrawn, perhaps satisfied that he was leaving their territory. His pace was faster than usual, driven by a desperate desire to return to the familiar world of roads and cell phone signals. The Graves Creek trailhead appeared through the trees like a vision of salvation. Jake's truck sat exactly where he had left it 5 days earlier, but he felt like a completely different person from the one who had started this journey. His cameras contained footage that would challenge everything science thought it knew about the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Jake's first stop after leaving the trailhead was the Quinault Ranger Station, where he reported his encounters to skeptical but professional park rangers. His footage was copied and forwarded to wildlife biologists and law enforcement agencies, beginning a chain of analysis that would eventually reach the highest levels of government. The drive back to Portland gave Jake time to process what he had experienced. By the time he reached his apartment, he had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would dedicate himself to understanding and documenting the creatures he had encountered, regardless of the personal cost or professional ridicule that might follow. Jake's first week back in Portland was a whirlwind of sleepless nights and obsessive video review. He had captured over 40 hours of footage during his 5-day trip, and hidden within that material were dozens of brief glimpses, sounds, and anomalies that painted a picture of intelligence beyond anything he had imagined possible in the wilderness. The clearest footage came from his final night, when the creature had approached his tent. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed details that made Jake's hands shake as he worked at his computer. The being's facial features showed a blend of human and ape characteristics, but the eyes held an awareness that transcended both. When enhanced and slowed down, the creature's vocalizations revealed complex tonal patterns that suggested structured communication. Jake's YouTube channel had always focused on the beauty and solitude of wilderness hiking, but now he faced an impossible decision. Publishing his Bigfoot footage would transform his life in ways he couldn't predict. His credibility as an outdoor educator would be questioned. His peaceful hiking adventures would become media circuses, and he would forever be known as that Bigfoot guy, rather than the serious nature photographer he had worked years to become. But the evidence was too compelling to ignore. Jake had always prided himself on honesty with his audience, and hiding this discovery felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. After a week of agonizing deliberation, he made his choice. On September 28, 2021, Jake uploaded a video titled, "Something Followed Me for 5 Days in the Olympic Wilderness, Raw Footage." The 43-minute compilation included his clearest encounters, enhanced audio of the vocalizations, and detailed analysis of the footprint evidence. His introduction was simple and direct, explaining that he had been hiking alone in the wilderness for 8 years and had never experienced anything like this. He wasn't asking viewers to believe him, he was just showing them what happened so they could draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed over 100,000 times and generated thousands of comments, ranging from supportive to skeptical to outright hostile. Major news outlets picked up the story, and Jake found himself fielding interview requests from around the world. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum from Idaho State University was among the first scientists to contact Jake directly. As one of the world's leading experts on Bigfoot evidence, Dr. Meldrum had seen countless hoaxes and misidentifications, but Jake's footage impressed him with its consistency and detail. Dr. Meldrum explained during their first phone conversation that what struck him about Jake's documentation was the behavioral coherence. These weren't random encounters. They showed a pattern of intelligent observation and interaction that was very difficult to fake convincingly. The scientific analysis that followed was more thorough than anything Jake had expected. Audio experts studied the vocalizations, finding harmonic frequencies and structural patterns that didn't match any known North American wildlife. Primatologists analyzed the creature's movement patterns, noting locomotion characteristics that suggested a large bipedal primate adapted for forest environments. Most compelling was the analysis of Jake's footprint casts. Dr. Grover Krantz's former colleagues at Washington State University examined the plaster impressions using techniques developed for forensic investigations. The prints showed dermal ridges, pressure patterns, and anatomical details that would be nearly impossible to fabricate convincingly. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptical organizations like the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry published detailed critiques of Jake's evidence, suggesting alternative explanations ranging from misidentified bears to elaborate hoaxes. The debate raged across social media platforms and academic forums, with Jake caught in the middle of a controversy he had never sought. The attention took a serious toll on Jake's personal life. His girlfriend of 3 years, Sarah, struggled with the sudden media scrutiny and the way their relationship had become secondary to Jake's obsession with his forest encounters. Friends who had once joined him on hiking trips now made excuses to avoid the cameras and questions that followed him everywhere. Sarah told him during one of their final arguments that he wasn't the same person who had left for that trip. It was like those things in the forest had taken away the Jake she fell in love with and left someone else in his place. She wasn't wrong. Jake found himself unable to enjoy simple hikes without constantly scanning the forest for signs of his mysterious watchers. Every shadow could hide a massive figure. Every unusual sound might be an attempt at communication. The wilderness that had once been his sanctuary had become a place of constant vigilance and anticipation. But Jake's dedication to understanding his experience also brought unexpected connections. He began corresponding with other witnesses who had remained silent for years, afraid of ridicule or disbelief. Their stories revealed a pattern of encounters throughout the Pacific Northwest that suggested a stable population of these creatures living in the most remote wilderness areas. Maria Santos, a wildlife biologist from Bellingham, contacted Jake 6 months after his video went viral. She had been conducting unofficial research into Bigfoot sightings for over a decade, documenting reports from credible witnesses including park rangers, wildlife photographers, and experienced outdoors people. Maria explained during their first meeting that Jake's footage corroborated behavioral patterns she had been tracking for years. These creatures seemed to have a complex social structure and territorial behavior that was far more sophisticated than mainstream science acknowledged. Together, Jake and Maria began planning return expeditions to the Olympic Peninsula, using Jake's documented encounter locations as starting points for more systematic research. They installed motion-activated cameras throughout the Quinault River Valley and began collecting environmental DNA samples from water sources where the creatures might drink. The research yielded tantalizing results. Several cameras captured brief glimpses of large, bipedal figures moving through the forest at night. Water samples contained genetic material that didn't match any known species in scientific databases. Most intriguingly, audio recordings revealed complex vocalizations that seemed to represent a form of long-distance communication between different groups. Jake's life had been permanently altered by his 5 days in the Olympic wilderness. His YouTube channel evolved from hiking entertainment to serious cryptozoological research, attracting a global audience of researchers, witnesses, and curious observers. He published a book about his experience, Followed: 5 Days with the Unknown, which became a bestseller in the cryptozoology community. But success came with a price. Jake's relationships suffered under the weight of his obsession, and his mental health struggled with the constant pressure of being a public figure in a controversial field. He began working with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, learning to process the psychological impact of his encounters. His therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, explained that what he had experienced was a form of contact with an intelligence that existed outside normal understanding. It was natural that such an encounter would fundamentally change how he saw the world and his place in it. 3 years after his original encounter, Jake continues to research and document evidence of Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. His work has contributed to a growing body of scientific literature that suggests these creatures may represent a surviving population of ancient hominids that have adapted to life in North America's most remote wilderness areas. The creatures that followed Jake for 5 days in September 2021 remain as mysterious as ever, but their brief interaction with one curious human has opened a window into a hidden world that exists parallel to our own, reminding us that even in our modern age of satellite imagery and GPS tracking, the wilderness still holds secrets that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Jake's story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from seeking them out, but from remaining open to the unexpected encounters that await those brave enough to venture alone into the wild places where mystery still lives.